The night our lottery numbers hit, my mother-in-law Patricia smiled like a cat with a saucer of cream, poured us both the last of a bottle of wine cooler she'd had in the fridge since 2009, and told me to drive her to the lottery office first thing Monday morning so we could claim our $1.8 million prize together. She never took me. She went alone, cashed the ticket that had my initials in the corner, and 3 weeks later closed on a 3-bedroom beachfront condo with a wraparound deck and a view of the Gulf she'd been showing me in magazines for years. 6 months after that, I closed on the condo next door to hers, number 407, and bolted a brass plaque to the lobby wall that read "Generosity rewarded, greed exposed." I turned it into a grief retreat for widows where the coffee is always free, and the only requirement is that you never let a family vulture pick your bones. This is how I did it. I need to go back 5 years, to the night my husband Tom died. Tom was a quiet man who fixed HVAC units for a living, the kind of guy who would spend his Saturday afternoons rewiring a neighbor's thermostat for nothing but a glass of sweet tea and a thank you. He had big hands that were always nicked and calloused from sheet metal, and a habit of humming old Merle Haggard songs under his breath while he worked. His only true luxury was a Powerball ticket every Friday evening with his mother. It was their little ritual, started back when he was a teenager, and she was working double shifts at the textile mill, a $2 daydream they shared. When we got married, I became the third wheel in the ritual, driving to the gas station with them, each of us picking a number, and Tom filling out the slip while Patricia watched over his shoulder and criticized his handwriting. She'd say, "You loop your sevens like a European, nobody's going to read that right," and he'd just grin and darken the bubble extra carefully. I loved those Friday nights. After Tom collapsed in the parking lot of a supply warehouse, a massive aneurysm that took him before the ambulance even arrived, I sat in our house for 3 days staring at the dust motes and not eating. Patricia showed up at my kitchen table on the 4th day with a coffee can full of loose change and a spiral notebook, the same one they'd used for years to track their numbers and small wins. She looked older than I'd ever seen her perm flat on one side, and she said Tom would have wanted the pool to keep going. She said it would be our little tether to him, a way to keep his memory alive. I was so hollowed out by grief that I agreed without thinking. She patted my hand and said, "Just $50 a week, dear. I'll handle the tickets. You just bring the cash, it'll be our thing now." Her voice was soft, almost reverent, and I believed her. I am a woman of routines, not out of neurosis but out of necessity. Before I married Tom, I spent 11 years as a bookkeeper for a commercial roofing company in Mobile, and I still record every dollar that passes through my hands in a ledger, physical and digital. It's not obsessive, it's just that when you've spent a decade reconciling accounts payable, you learn that a missing 12 cents can cascade into a 5-figure audit. After Tom died, I used a portion of his $100,000 life insurance policy to keep the household running and to fund my half of the lottery pool. Every Friday, without fail, I withdrew exactly $50 from a dedicated savings account that I labeled Lottery Pool in my banking app. I placed the cash in a sealed envelope with the date written on the flap in blue ballpoint, and I handed it to Patricia. She would roll her eyes and call me the little accountant, but she took the envelope every single time. I kept the withdrawal receipts, the bank statements, and a little pocket calendar where I noted each handoff. 5 years of that, 260 Fridays, $13,000 of my own money, all documented, all traceable. The discovery didn't come with a death or a funeral. It came on a Thursday afternoon in July when my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia containing only a photo of a ticket and a row of numbers and 3 fire emojis. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters, and I pulled up the winning numbers on the lottery site with a soapy hand and nearly dropped the phone. We had matched all 5 white balls and the Powerball, $1.8 million. I called her immediately, and for a solid 30 seconds we just shrieked into each other's ears like schoolgirls. She said she'd put the ticket in her fire safe, the little grey box she kept in the hall closet, and we'd go together Monday morning to the claims center in Montgomery. I offered to drive, even mapped out the route on my phone while we talked. We made plans to pay off my mortgage and her car loan, to finally fix the sagging porch on my house, and maybe buy a little duplex by the water so we could rent out half and never worry again. I told her I had every record we'd need to show the pool was a formal joint venture, right down to the memo lines on the bank transfers, and she said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's just going to make the tax man happy. You're so thorough." I laughed. I trusted her completely. Monday morning came, and when I pulled into her gravel driveway at 7 a.m. sharp, her car was gone. The curtains were drawn and a single porch light still burned yellow in the daylight. I called her cell. She let it ring to voicemail 3 times before picking up with a breezy, "Don't be mad, honey, but I woke up early and couldn't wait. I'm already in line at the lottery office. There was a traffic jam on the interstate and I thought I'd beat it. I'll have your half deposited by end of business tomorrow." My stomach turned to ice water, but I told myself this was just Patricia being Patricia. Impulsive, yes. Deceitful, no. I waited. Tuesday passed with no deposit. Wednesday I called her and she claimed the check was taking longer to clear because of some federal verification hold, her voice a little too rushed. Thursday, she stopped answering entirely. On Friday, I drove back to her apartment and found the door unlocked and the place emptied out. Furniture gone, walls bare except for a few stray picture hooks. The only things left were 3 black trash bags on the curb and a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, all addressed to a new beachfront address in Orange Beach, a condo complex called Gulf Breeze Towers. She had moved out in 3 days. I dug through those trash bags right there on the curb, the plastic warm from the sun and smelling of old coffee grounds and rotting lettuce. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found the spiral notebook. It was the same flimsy one Tom used to jot down our numbers each week, a cardboard cover with a faded maroon dye and a coffee stain on page 3, shaped like a teardrop. Patricia had tossed it with a pile of old grocery circulars and expired coupons. I snatched it out of the bag, and a little scrap of paper fluttered out from the back cover, a torn piece of yellow legal pad folded into a tiny square. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was Tom's, a tight, practical script I knew from 1,000 grocery lists and birthday cards. It read, "Paddy, if you're reading this, you're already thinking about how to cut my wife out. I've seen you do it before with Aunt Clara's estate with the church fundraiser money. You think I never noticed? Keep every ticket stub and every bank paper, sweetheart. You're going to need them." He had written it to me, not to her. He had tucked it in the notebook years ago, probably after a fight I never knew about, and Patricia had never found it. I sat on the curb with trash juice soaking into my jeans and read that note 10 times until the words blurred. Tom, my quiet duct tape and baling wire husband, had left me a warning from the grave. It was the only thing that kept me from dissolving into despair. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always leaves a paper trail. Now, back to how I pulled the threads until the whole rotten tapestry fell apart. The manipulation started the very next week. Patricia called me in a tone so syrupy it could have glazed a ham. She said she was worried about me, all alone in that creaky old house, no one to take care of me since Tom left. She said she had bought a beautiful condo, Unit 406, a 3-bedroom with a view that would heal my soul, and there was a guest room with my name on it. She wanted me to come stay for a few weeks so she could keep an eye on me, and we could sort out the money face-to-face, family style. I heard the undercurrent, of course. She wanted me in her orbit where she could control what I saw, who I talked to, and most importantly, what I signed. So I decided to become the most compliant, foggy-brained widow she had ever met. I packed a small overnight bag, left my filing cabinet of records in a locked storage unit under my cousin's name, and drove 3 hours to Orange Beach with a smile pinned to my face. When I arrived, Patricia hugged me with the theatrical grief of a daytime soap actress. She was wearing a new linen pantsuit, the tags still poking out from the collar, and her hair was freshly dyed a shade of copper that didn't exist in nature. She immediately launched into a monologue about how the lottery people had been so difficult, how there were taxes and withholdings and complications, with the joint claim because my name wasn't on the ticket itself. She said she needed me to sign a little form, just a standard release, to unblock the funds so she could make the transfer to my account. She placed a single sheet of paper on the granite kitchen island, a white quartz slab that still had the installer's sticker on one edge. I read it slowly, squinting as if I couldn't see the fine print. It was a waiver of any interest in the lottery proceeds, drafted in legalese but clear as glass. I would relinquish all claims to the winnings and accept a one-time ex gratia payment of $10,000 as a thank you for my years of friendship and support. $10,000 against $8 million she had already begun spending. I blinked at it, tilted my head like a confused puppy and said, "Oh, Paddy, I'm just so tired from the drive. The traffic on the bridge was something awful. Can I look at this after I've had a nap? My head's all foggy." She smiled, a tight, perfumed smile, and patted my cheek. "Of course, sweetheart, take all the time you need. I just want what's best for you, you know that." That night I didn't sleep. I walked the condo barefoot, memorizing every drawer, every closet, every locked door. The place smelled of new paint and something faintly coconut from a plug-in air freshener. She had moved in with the speed of a fleeing convict. Boxes still lined the hallway, labeled in black marker. Good dishes, Christmas, photos Tom. That one caught in my throat. A brand new 70-inch television was mounted on the wall with the protective plastic still on the bezel, and the kitchen was stocked with appliances that looked like they had never been used. The guest room where I slept had a window that faced the building next door, a matching beachfront complex with a mirrored balcony. Unit 407 sat dark and empty, a little for sale sign dangling from the railing, spinning slowly in the sea breeze. I didn't know it then, but that view would become my reason to keep fighting, a daily reminder of what I was building toward. For the next 2 weeks I played the role of the meek, broken widow. I shuffled around in worn terracloth slippers, sighed a lot while staring out at the waves, and let Patricia think I had no fight left. I agreed with everything she said. Yes, the banks are so complicated. Yes, I'm lucky to have you handling the details. No, I haven't talked to any lawyers because why would I? Meanwhile, I watched her like an undercover auditor. Every morning, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and make frantic phone calls to someone she called Frankie, her voice dropping to a hush when I entered the room. I'd pause in the hallway, pretending to adjust my slipper and catch fragments. Bridge loan, balloon payment, refinance, just need her signature and we're clear. I saw credit card statements piling up from high-end furniture stores, a line of credit from a coastal bank I didn't recognize, and a past due notice from a title company. She had spent the first chunk of the lottery money before the check even fully cleared, and now she was stacking loans on top of credit cards like a house of cards in a windstorm. I noted every envelope, every phone call time, every nervous glance at her phone when it buzzed, and she silenced it. The household accident that gave me my opening happened on a Tuesday morning. Patricia came stumbling out of her bathroom, hair wrapped in a white towel, shrieking that the hot water had quit and the shower was dribbling cold like a garden hose. She couldn't even figure out which breaker to check, just stood there jabbing at the touchscreen thermostat as if it controlled the water heater. I grew up in a house with a father who was an electrician and a mother who could fix a garbage disposal, blindfolded with a butter knife. I went into the utility closet, a narrow space off the kitchen with stacked washer-dryer and a tankless water heater mounted on the wall. I pulled off the front cover, and there it was, the intake filter clogged with fine white sand and sediment from the beach water supply. A simple fix. I cleaned it out with an old toothbrush I found under the sink, reset the flow sensor, and had hot water flowing in 15 minutes. Patricia watched me from the doorway with a strange mix of gratitude and resentment, and in that moment I noticed something I hadn't before. On a high shelf in that utility closet, stuffed behind a box of light bulbs, was the fire safe. It was a cheap black model with a 4-digit mechanical dial, the same one she'd used to store the lottery ticket. The kind you could buy at any office supply store. I'd seen her fiddle with it years ago at her old apartment. She often used the same code for everything, the house number from the street where she raised Tom. That evening, while she was on a phone call with Frankie and pacing the balcony with a wine glass in hand, I slipped back into the closet. The safe was locked, but I recalled a trick from my old office days when our filing cabinet key went missing and the locksmith charged $150 just to show up. A heavy-duty paper clip, the kind coated in colored plastic, straighten it out and bend a tiny hook at one end. This wasn't a bank vault, just a simple tumbler dial with enough manufacturing slack to decode if you applied steady pressure to the latch and turned the dial slowly, feeling for the subtle resistance of each true gate. I knelt on the tile floor, pressed the paperclip against the release button and began to turn. The first number clicked with a faint vibration, 2. The second followed a slightly deeper bump, 1, then 1 again, then 9. The year Tom was born. The safe popped open with a soft creak. Inside, I found a manila folder stuffed with documents, the kind of chaos that a bookkeeper's eye immediately wants to sort. A copy of the cashed lottery check, made out solely to Patricia Callahan, with a bank stamp dated the Monday after our win. A settlement statement from the title company on the condo, showing a cash purchase price of $620,000. A stack of loan applications from 2 different hard money lenders, and then, tucked in the back, a single piece of paper that made my blood run cold as the Gulf in January. It was a promissory note post-dated for $40,000, with my name forged at the bottom as a co-signer. She had practiced my signature on a scrap of receipt paper clipped to the folder, tracing it from some old birthday card I'd given her years ago. The forgery was clumsy, the slant slightly wrong, but it would have passed a casual glance. She had attached my name, my credit, my entire financial life, to a predatory loan with a 22% interest rate, a debt I hadn't known existed and had never agreed to. I took photos of every page with my phone, hands trembling so badly I had to brace my elbows on the floor. Then I replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it, relocked the safe, and slipped the paperclip into my pocket. That night I lay awake in the guest room, the sound of waves crashing a dull roar outside, and I realized Patricia wasn't just trying to cut me out of the winnings. She was actively saddling me with debt, building a trap that would leave me legally obligated to cover her spending spree if I ever tried to challenge her. The forged promissory note was the smoking gun, but I needed more. I needed to prove the joint venture, to show a court that the lottery pool was a legitimate, ongoing financial arrangement, not just a handshake between grieving in-laws that could be dismissed as a family favor. The next morning, while Patricia had gone to a garden club meeting, that I suspected was really a meeting with Frankie at a coffee shop, I drove to my storage unit. The unit was in a climate-controlled facility, and I had to use 2 different keys and a gate code to get in. My file box sat on a metal shelf, unassuming beige cardboard, but inside it was a treasure. I brought it back to the condo in a reusable grocery bag, and when Patricia was out on another mysterious errand that afternoon, I spread 5 years of bank statements across the bed in the guest room like a forensic accountant preparing for trial. Each monthly statement showed a $50 withdrawal every single Friday, many of them with the memo line "Lottery Pool Patricia," typed in by me when I set up the recurring transfer. I had the corresponding deposit slips from her old bank account, where she had occasionally reimbursed me for small winnings, tiny amounts like $16 or $32, always in cash, but I had photocopied those slips and noted them in my ledger. I had the spiral notebook with Tom's handwriting and the warning note. I had a copy of the life insurance disbursement letter from the insurance company and my own meticulous Excel spreadsheets, printed on heavy paper, showing exactly when I began using those funds for the pool. I had the pocket calendar with each Friday marked LP$50 in blue ink, the same ink I used for everything. I had built a forensic accounting case without even knowing it, a paper trail so dense and interlocking that any half-competent lawyer could follow it like a road map. But I still needed an ally, someone inside the system who could take this pile of paper and turn it into legal ammunition. That ally came in the form of a woman named Denise Okonkwo, a compliance officer at the regional bank where Patricia had deposited the lottery check. I later learned that Patricia had made a fatal error. She had walked into the bank with a check for $8 million and tried to open multiple accounts in a single day, a personal checking, a money market, a CD, triggering a mandatory fraud review under the bank's anti-money laundering protocols. Denise had been assigned to the case. She left me a voicemail on a Wednesday afternoon, polite and professional, asking if I was the wife of the deceased Thomas Callahan and if I could clarify the nature of the joint lottery pool that Patricia had mentioned in passing during her account opening. I called her back from the parking deck of a Publix, my voice shaking like a leaf. I met Denise 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop called the Drowsy Pelican, a local place with mismatched chairs and a lazy ceiling fan. She was a sharp-eyed woman with close-cropped grey hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades untangling financial knots for a regional bank. She wore a simple navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio that looked like it had seen 1,000 audits. I told her my story, starting with Tom's death and ending with the forged promissory note. Then I slid a thick manila envelope across the table, the kind with a string and button closure, containing copies of every record I had. She spent 40 minutes paging through it, occasionally murmuring "remarkable" under her breath, her pen tapping the margin. Then she set the papers down, took off her reading glasses, and said something that made my heart begin to beat normally for the first time in months. "Mrs. Callahan, what you have here is a textbook case for a constructive trust. In this state, when 2 parties engage in a consistent financial arrangement with the mutual expectation of sharing proceeds, equity law views that as an implied trust. Your bank statements show a clear pattern of weekly contributions for 5 years. Her own reimbursement payments, even those tiny ones, prove she acknowledged the pool as a joint venture. The memo lines, the notebook, Tom's note, the life insurance trail, it forms a chain of evidence that would hold up in any court. And the forged promissory note, that crosses into criminal territory, potentially felony forgery and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I can't give you legal advice, but I can say that if you were to file a civil suit and provide this to the district attorney's office, Patricia would find herself in very, very hot water." Then Denise did something unexpected. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a small key taped to a manila envelope. She explained that when Tom died, He had left a small safety deposit box at their main downtown branch, one that neither Patricia nor I had ever accessed or even knew about. He had listed me as the sole beneficiary, and Denise as the authorized bank officer. She had been waiting for the right moment to contact me, and the lottery investigation had surfaced the box's existence during a routine asset search. She offered to take me to the bank right then to open it. We drove in separate cars to the branch, a quiet, marble-floored building that smelled of old paper and floor wax. In a private cubicle, Denise used her master key and my driver's license to access the box. Inside was a single sealed envelope. I opened it with trembling fingers, and there, in Tom's careful handwriting, was a letter dated 4 years before his death. It was 2 pages long, a rambling, affectionate note that began, "My dearest wife, if you're reading this, something has gone sideways with my mother." He went on to detail his concerns about Patricia's financial habits, the way she had maneuvered his Aunt Clara out of a shared inheritance, the missing church fundraiser money that was never accounted for but everyone suspected. He then stated his explicit wish that any future lottery winnings from their ongoing pool be split equally between me and Patricia, with a detailed history of the pool's origins and the verbal agreement they had made when I joined. He had signed and dated it, and included a photocopy of an old ticket stub with both our initials. It was a dead man's switch of intent, a posthumous instruction that neither of us could alter. Patricia had never known the box existed because Tom had kept it secret, perhaps from a lifetime of watching her maneuver, and had quietly set this countermeasure in place years before his aneurysm. I sat in that bank cubicle and cried for the first time since the funeral. The maximum cruelty beat arrived less than a week later, and it extinguished whatever residual warmth I still held for the woman who had raised my husband. I decided to stage a test, something I had been mulling over for days. I had noticed Patricia's anxiety mounting as her lenders began calling more frequently, the phone buzzing at odd hours, her voice sharp and clipped. She needed my signature on a refinance package that would roll her balloon payment into a longer term, but the hard money lender required my consent because of the forged co-signing on the original note. She was circling me like a shark, her smiles tighter, her questions more probing. So I chose a moment when we were alone in the condo, on a muggy Thursday afternoon, and I collapsed. I had rehearsed it. I waited until she was in the kitchen, hovering over her laptop with a glass of iced tea. I was pouring myself a glass of water from the fridge dispenser, and I let my body go heavy. I dropped the glass, heard it shatter on the tile floor, and I fell with a hard, real thud that jarred my tailbone and sent a real flash of pain up my spine. I lay still, eyes closed, breathing shallow and ragged. I heard Patricia's footsteps, the soft slap of her sandals. They stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. For a long, terrible moment there was only silence. Then I heard her say, "Oh, for heaven's sake," in a voice utterly devoid of concern, the kind of voice you'd use for a spilled carton of milk. She stepped over my legs carefully as if I were a piece of furniture left in the way, and walked directly to the kitchen table where the refinance documents were sitting in a blue folder. I heard the rustle of paper. I heard her dial her phone, the little electronic beeps, and then, "Frankie, I've got the papers right here." "No, she's fine, she's just being dramatic. She fainted or something. I'll get her signature before the end of the day, I promise. Tell them to hold off on the default notice." She did not touch me, she did not call 911, she did not even check if I was breathing. She stood over my apparently dying body and talked about loan terms and interest rate lock-ins while I lay there on the cold tile, a piece of shattered glass pressing into my palm where I had landed on a shard. I lay there for 2 minutes, listening to her discuss closing costs and prepayment penalties while my heart, which had been broken by grief, turned into a cold, precise machine. When I finally revived, groaning and clutching my head with a hand that was actually bleeding slightly from a small cut, Patricia barely looked up from her phone. She said, "You might want to lie down, honey. You've been under a lot of stress. I'll bring you some water. Just take it easy." I nodded, walked to the guest room, and stood in the doorway staring at the for sale sign on Unit 407 next door, its little red banner flapping in the wind. That night I packed my belongings into my suitcase, left a note saying I needed some fresh air, and moved into a budget motel 2 miles down the coastal highway. I called Denise from the motel parking lot, the phone pressed to my ear as the neon vacancy sign buzzed overhead, and said, "I'm ready. Let's finish this." The confrontation happened 10 days later at the bank, but those 10 days were a flurry of quiet, relentless legal maneuvering. I hired a lawyer, Rebecca Cho, a sharp young litigator in Mobile who specialized in elder and family fraud. She was recommended by Denise, and she worked on a contingency basis because the evidence was so overwhelming. We met in her office, a small room stacked with case files, and she laid out the strategy. We filed a civil complaint for a constructive trust and conversion, along with a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze Patricia's accounts and prevent her from selling the condo. We also filed a lis pendens on the property, a legal notice that it was subject to litigation, which would cloud the title and scare off any potential buyers. Rebecca coordinated with the district attorney's office, providing the forged promissory note as evidence of felony forgery. The DA's investigator, a quiet man with a pocket protector, met me at a diner and took my statement, nodding along as I showed him the photos and the original bank statements. He said, "This is one of the cleanest paper trails I've ever seen. You did the work for us." Patricia, desperate and cornered by her own overspending and the sudden freezing of her accounts, believed she had one last play. She called me with false cheer, her voice dripping sweetness, and said she had scheduled an appointment with a lovely financial advisor at the bank who would help us settle the lottery matter once and for all. She asked me to meet her there on Friday at noon, saying she'd found a solution that would make us both happy. I knew exactly what she was planning. She would have the refinance package and a final waiver, and she would try to pressure me into signing in a semi-public setting, counting on my ingrained politeness and the presence of strangers to make me fold. I agreed to be there. I told her I'd be happy to talk things through. I arrived at the bank at 11:30 and met Denise and a bank security officer in a back office. Rebecca was already there, her briefcase open, reviewing the court orders. The lobby was arranged like a stage. The seating area with its plush leather chairs, the teller line, the glass-walled offices where loans were signed. At exactly noon, I walked into the main lobby through the front entrance, not the back hallway, so Patricia would see me coming. She was already seated in one of those deep leather chairs, facing the door, wearing a bright turquoise blouse and too much gold jewelry. Flanking her was a nervous, balding man in a cheap suit who I recognized from a photo in her trash as Frankie, the suspended mortgage broker. He had a stack of papers in front of him and a pen already uncapped. Patricia's face split into a smile when she saw me, but it faltered the instant Denise stepped out from behind the teller line, holding a black binder. "What is she doing here?" Patricia snapped, her voice cutting across the quiet lobby. A couple of other customers glanced over. I walked up slowly, not rushing, and sat down across from her. I didn't touch the papers she slid towards me. I folded my hands in my lap, felt the small cut on my palm still healing under a bandage, and said the line I'd been polishing in my head for weeks, the one I'd whispered to the motel ceiling every night. "I'm not signing anything, Patricia, not a single page, not today, not ever, and if you ever forge my name again, the next time you see me, I'll be holding a prison visitor's pass." Her face went white, then red, a mottled flush that crept up from her neck. She started to bluster about slander and lies. But Denise stepped forward and calmly produced the photos of the forged promissory note, the bank records of the joint pool with every $50 withdrawal highlighted, Tom's letter from the safety deposit box in a clear evidence sleeve, and a sworn affidavit from a forensic accountant who had already reviewed the entire file and certified the pattern of joint contributions. Rebecca appeared at my shoulder and handed Patricia a copy of the restraining order and the civil complaint. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Frankie started shuffling his papers frantically, looking for an exit. Two uniformed officers who had been waiting in the bank's break room entered the lobby. They didn't make a scene, just quietly asked Patricia and Frankie to step into a private office for questioning. Patricia refused at first, her voice rising to a near shout about how I was a gold-digging opportunist who had turned her son against her. But when one officer gently took her elbow, she deflated, the fight leaving her body like air from a balloon. She walked away clutching her turquoise blouse, and Frankie followed, his face the color of old oatmeal. He was later charged as an accessory to the fraud, for knowingly helping her structure the loans with the forged signature. The aftermath was neither swift nor simple, but it was thorough. The civil suit for a constructive trust took 8 months to wind through the courts. During that time, Patricia's condo was subjected to a prejudgment attachment, effectively freezing it from sale. The hard money lender who had accepted the forged signature came under federal scrutiny because their loan practices were predatory and their paperwork sloppy, and they eventually settled to avoid a larger investigation. The promissory note was voided by court order, and my name was cleared. Patricia was charged with felony forgery and attempted grand theft. She ultimately pleaded to a lesser charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult because the DA's office saw the clean paper trail and knew a jury would convict her in under an hour. She received 18 months of house arrest, served not in the beachfront condo but in a small rented apartment in the Florida Panhandle, a lien on her remaining assets, and a court order to pay restitution. At the final civil hearing, the judge, an older woman with a sharp gaze, reviewed the mountain of evidence. I sat at a polished wooden table while Rebecca walked the court through the timeline. The weekly $50 withdrawals, the memo lines, the pocket calendar, the reimbursement slips, the dead man's letter, all of it laid out in a clear binder with tabbed sections. The judge ruled that a constructive trust existed. The lottery proceeds after taxes and Patricia's early spending spree on furniture, and a leased luxury car she had no business driving, had been reduced to roughly $1.4 million in liquid assets. The court awarded me my half. After accounting for legal fees that Patricia was forced to pay, the recovery of the fraudulent loans that were wiped from my record, and a small punitive award for the emotional distress of the forgery, I received a settlement and judgment payout of $920,000. Patricia was left with a fraction of what she had stolen, her credit in tatters, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that the church circle she once gossiped with began actively avoiding her calls. She eventually moved to a smaller town near the Alabama border, where she tells anyone who will listen that I stole her son and her winnings. The unit next door, 407, went on the market 3 weeks after the verdict. It had been sitting unsold because of a title issue, but the bank that held the note was eager to offload it. I drove up with a cashier's check, paid in full, no mortgage. The realtor looked at me like I was a ghost. I spent the next 6 months renovating it, not with granite countertops and gold fixtures like Patricia's place, but with wide doorways for easy movement, a communal kitchen with a big farmhouse sink, a sunroom full of hanging plants and wicker chairs that catch the morning light, and 5 simple bedrooms each named for a different flower: Rose, Lily, Iris, Daisy, and Camellia, which was Tom's favorite. I called it the Widow's Lantern. It is a grief retreat for women who have lost their partners and need a place to breathe for a week or a month, without anyone asking them to sign anything, without anyone measuring their pain against a ledger or a clerk. The first guest arrived on a Tuesday in April, a widow from Baton Rouge whose own in-laws had tried to take her house. She sat on the balcony, watched the waves, and drank a cup of coffee from the free pot I keep brewing. She told me she hadn't felt safe in years, and I knew exactly what she meant. On the wall of the common room, right where you can see it when you walk in, I mounted a brass plaque. It reads "Generosity Rewarded, Greed Exposed," and underneath, in smaller letters, "In loving memory of Thomas Callahan, who kept his promises, and who wrote the truth down when it mattered most." Patricia can see the plaque from her old balcony if she ever dares to visit. I know she hasn't set foot in Orange Beach since the day they froze her accounts, but I like knowing it's there, a quiet brass declaration that the paper trail wins, that integrity has a longer shelf life than any con job. I've heard through a distant cousin that Patricia still tells people I set the whole thing up, that I manipulated her and turned Tom against his own mother. I don't engage. I have 5 years of bank statements that say otherwise, a notebook with a coffee stain and a yellow scrap of paper in my own fire safe, and a letter from a dead man who loved me enough to write down a warning and hide it where his mother would never look. My husband was a quiet man who fixed air conditioners and hummed Merle Haggard and understood, deep in his bones, that family isn't a blood pact. It's a record of how you treat each other. When you build your life on integrity, you leave a trail wide enough for justice to follow. That trail led me through trash bags and locked safes and forged signatures, all the way to a beachfront condo where grieving women now sit on a balcony and watch the waves and know, just for a moment, that they are safe. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If today's story hit close to home, like and subscribe so YouTube knows you want more stories about taking back what's yours. Thank you for watching, and remember, keep your receipts and keep your peace.